Jeff Booth said the interest rate rises by the Fed have a more sinister endgame. They are aimed at checking the rise of China besides the internal inflationary narrative. With USD as a global currency, a weakening value means China advances their global domination plan cheaply and easily. And raising rates puts pressure on the Chinese economy and slows them down, despite the pain it's causing domestically. He thinks that China is the main target. What do you think? And does it mean the Fed hikes are more likely to continue? So, brilliant question, and utmost respect for Jeff Booth. He is a wizard. But I couldn't find a record of him actually saying this. I know he loosely referred to it as a tangential idea, perhaps. But I don't see this. So first of all, I know his book incredibly well, and tried to find something that he specifically said about this, but we couldn't find anything in the book. And again, great book. But he did warn about debt deflation, which is very, very important. This he calls a Great Depression on steroids. I love that. And if the Federal Reserve continues to hike interest rates, he believes this could cause a huge problem, that whole debt deflation thing. Now, in terms of the Fed's toolbox, a couple of things here. While Booth does not explicitly link the Fed raising interest rates to combat China, Booth does argue that the traditional economic levers that the Fed has in its toolbox are less effective in the new global landscape in the book, The Price of Tomorrow, that I just showed you. Now, the Fed sets interest rates as a means of controlling inflation and promoting economic growth. When the Fed raises interest rates, it makes obviously borrowing more expensive, which just slow down everything, yada, yada. You guys know about this very, very well at this stage of the game. The big question is debt. So we know how out of control debt is. In fact, it is beyond a joke. And my whole thesis was the more they increase rates, the more they reduce GDP, the more they reduce tax revenue for the business, the more they explode deficits, and the more they increase debt, which means the more they have to print money, the more they increase inflation. That was my whole thesis. And I assumed logic would prevail within the Fed with their 320 PhDs. I was wrong. No, there's no logic there. And that makes me think maybe there's another plan in play. And silver tinfoil hat on here, I think maybe Jerome Powell is trying to implode the Biden presidency. Who knows? Because one random idea, because it doesn't make any sense what they're doing. Even doing a huge amount of QE over the last 2 weeks and raising rates into that is just stupid. Anyway, enough of that. This is the real problem, though. This is China. They're dumping US debt as fast as they can. I was surprised some of these countries actually had so much US debt. But as of January 2023, the total amount of US debt held by foreign buyers was about 7.4 trillion. When you add all these numbers up, 253.4 billion is down from a year ago. That's more than $250 billion reduction from foreign buyers, and they have only just begun to get rid of US debt. And the main sellers were Japan, 200 billion, China, nearly 200 billion, Ireland, 55 billion, France, 49 billion, Brazil, 22 billion. What else am I missing? South Korea, 18 billion. But the key thing is, China was the biggest holder. They dropped 17.5% of their debt in 11 months, which is staggering. And they're trying to get away from it. And while you may think the Fed are trying to outsmart China, remember, China is in bed with Russia, and China is working with major economies throughout Africa and Brazil and Southeast Asia and you name it. BRICS plans for currencies, trade agreements to get away from the dollar. It's all happening. I think the minds that prevail in places like China are far ahead of the thinking of the Fed. I think the Fed is doing different things. So that's just my theory. I could be completely wrong. And no offense to Jerome Powell and President Biden and all of those presidents that I mentioned. But this is basically the end game here. And sorry for being long-winded, but it's a very difficult question. And I want to make sure I cover it well. So higher interest rates theoretically could affect China's growth, but I think they have very limited power today. Second, higher interest rates rise in the US. Investors may find US assets more attractive and not invest in China. But as I've mentioned as well, China is now the most crowded trade. So that's not working either. People they're investing in China now more than any other asset class on earth today. Third, can also lead to capital outflows out of China, which can slow Chinese growth. Well, that means the Chinese would be attracted by the high interest rates in the US. They wouldn't invest in China, they'd invest in the US. No, not with capital controls, so that's not going to happen either. Also, Chinese debt denominated in dollars at higher rates can reduce their profitability and hamper their ability to invest and expand. And that's exactly why they're dumping US treasuries as quickly as they possibly can, because they want off the dollar and they don't want to be beholden to them. So net, long-winded answer, no. So that's my answer to your theory about what Jeff Booth may or may not have said. I'm not sure.